In the film industry, there is a golden standard considered an immutable law: 24 frames per second. Directors tell us that this speed is sufficient to deceive the human eye and create the perfect illusion of smooth motion. We believe them. We sit in our chairs, look at the screen, and think we see everything that happened. But this is a lie, a beautiful technological lie. 24 frames per second is not a window into reality. It is a sieve. Between every captured moment exists a blind zone, a tiny pocket of time in which the camera is absolutely blind. In the world of ordinary people, nothing important happens in this interval. But in Hong Kong, in 1973, on a sweat-soaked movie set, a crime hid in this blind spot. The operator of the Aeroflex camera was an industry veteran. He had filmed explosions, chases, and falls from heights. He trusted his eyes and his equipment. But on that stifling Tuesday, he encountered a phenomenon that made him question his own sanity. He heard the sound of the impact with his own ears, a dry, sickening crack. He saw a man collapse to the floor, but when the film was developed in the lab, they discovered something frightening on it: emptiness. In that single key frame where contact should have been, Bruce Lee simply wasn't there. He had disappeared, evaporated, and then appeared again, already in a different pose. He moved faster than the mechanical shutter of the camera could close. But the most important thing in this story is not what went missing from the film. The most important thing is the sound that preceded the disappearance. The quiet, rhythmic, mechanical clatter of the camera motor. Remember this sound. This monotonous, emotionless rhythm would 40 seconds later become the only impartial witness to an attempted murder disguised as an accident. The Golden Harvest studio pavilion resembled a giant oven in which human ambitions were slowly baking. The air was thick, almost tangible, with the smell of acetate film, cheap cigarettes, and male testosterone. In the center of the set, wiping his wet neck with a towel, stood Jackson. He wasn't just a stuntman. He was a 100-kilogram monument to street violence. A veteran of port brawls whose face was a map of scars, each having its own brutal history. Jackson hated Bruce. This hatred was not hot, like a flash of anger, but cold and heavy, like a tombstone. He despised the fame of this little man. He despised his philosophy, his talk of water, his glory. For Jackson, who grew up in a world where the one who hits first and hardest is right, Bruce was just a dancer, an arrogant actor who had forgotten his place. And today Jackson decided to correct this injustice. In a dark corner of the pavilion, behind the scenery of an ancient temple, a group of extras whispered. They knew the plan. The script called for simple choreography. Jackson makes a wide, sweeping swing. Bruce ducks under the arm. The camera captures the dynamics. Standard procedure. A safe 15 centimeters of distance between fist and jaw. But Jackson did not intend to miss. Today we send the dancer to sleep, he whispered to his buddy, kneading his massive knuckles. He intended to put into this blow not just strength. He intended to put into it all his envy, the entire weight of his body, and the inertia of the rotation. It was a plan for the perfect crime. Write everything off as a calculation error, an accident, got carried away with the role. Who judges a stuntman for excess enthusiasm? But in this equation, there was one variable that Jackson, blinded by his ego, did not account for. Bruce Lee stood with his back to the conspirators. He was drinking water, appearing relaxed, almost carefree. He seemed completely absorbed in conversation with the director. But those who knew Bruce truly would have noticed a barely perceptible change in his posture. His shoulders dropped even lower. His breathing became deeper. He didn't hear the whisper in the corner. The noise of the fans drowned out the words. But he felt the intent. He felt that specific, sticky cold that emanates from a person preparing to stab you in the back. Like an animal senses a change in atmospheric pressure before a storm, Bruce felt a change in the ether of the pavilion. The camera shutter began its acceleration. The clatter of the motor picked up speed. The trap was set. and the hunter was sure the victim suspected nothing. He was wrong. There was a victim in the room, but it wasn't Bruce Lee. "Action!" shouted the director. In the ordinary world, this word means the start of a game, the beginning of pretense, where people fake love and fake death. But in the stale air of the third pavilion, this word sounded not like a command, but like the shot of a starter pistol at a slaughterhouse. Jackson moved forward, and in that same second, any professional standing close enough would have noticed a strange metamorphosis. The actor disappeared. Only a predator remained. His shoulders, which a second ago were relaxed for the camera, turned to stone. His step became shorter, denser. He wasn't playing a role. He was loading kinetic energy into his hips, preparing to release it at one devastating point. The script was banal in its simplicity. A wide, beautiful swing. A heroic dodge. The camera captures the dynamics. But Jackson rewrote the script in his head. He knew Bruce expected stage distance, a safe gap of 15 centimeters that allows the cameraman to trick the viewer. Jackson decided to steal those 15 centimeters. He imperceptibly shifted his front foot. Just half a step. To an inexperienced eye, this meant nothing. But in the geometry of combat, this half step is the difference between a miss and a broken jaw. He intended not just to strike. He intended to go through Bruce's face, using the inertia of his 100-kilogram body as a battering ram. Have you ever wondered what a person thinks a second before committing a vile act? Jackson felt no guilt. He felt euphoria. In his head, that sound was already playing, the crunch that would prove to the whole world that the king is naked, that all this talk about water and energy is nonsense for tourists. He saw Bruce's back, his relaxed pose, and his ego swelled to the size of the pavilion. He thought he was the hunter who had cornered his prey. But here lies the main mistake made by everyone who confuses confidence with competence. Jackson looked at Bruce, but he didn't see him. Bruce Lee stood in the center of the frame, outwardly absolutely calm. His hands were down. His breathing was even. It seemed he completely trusted his scene partner. But this was an illusion created for the predator. In reality, Bruce was in a state neurologists call hypervigilance. He didn't hear the conspirators' whispers, but his skin read the vibrations of the air. He felt the change in the rhythm of Jackson's steps. A stage step is light, springy. A combat step is heavy, grounded, pressing into the floor. Bruce heard Jackson's soles biting into the surface, creating a fulcrum for a real strike. And now, imagine yourself in Bruce's place. You have a split second. Your brain receives the signal. Threat is real. Instinct screams, run or block. But Bruce didn't move. Why? This is a mystery that tormented eyewitnesses for years. Why did he let Jackson get so close? Did he not notice the switch? Or perhaps he was waiting for exactly this? Waiting for the trap to snap shut, but not for him? The tension in the pavilion reached critical mass. The extras who knew about the plan stopped breathing. They waited for blood. The cameraman, suspecting nothing, gripped the camera handles tighter, trying to hold focus. Jackson's fist began its movement. It wasn't a theatrical swing. It was a short, sharp start from the hip, a technique designed for a knockout, not for cinema. The muscles of his back contracted, transferring the impulse to the shoulder, then to the elbow, then to the fist. The speed grew exponentially. 15 meters per second. 12. 10. The fist turned into a blur carrying enough energy to tear a head off a neck. At this moment, time stretched for Jackson. He already saw the result. He already tasted victory. He saw a defenseless jaw, open, vulnerable. He thought, I caught him. I caught the legend. It was the moment of his greatest triumph. And simultaneously, the moment of his most terrible mistake. Because he didn't know one simple fact. Bruce Lee wasn't standing still. More precisely, his body was there, but his center of gravity had already shifted. Bruce wasn't just waiting for the blow. He was preparing an answer that was so brutal and effective that a camera filming at 24 frames per second simply wouldn't have time to see it. Jackson was flying toward his own doom, confident he was flying toward glory. 15 centimeters. That was exactly how much remained between Jackson's battered knuckles and Bruce Lee's cheekbone. In the world of physics, this distance is traversed in 200ths of a second. This is less than it takes the human eye to blink. Less than it takes a nerve impulse to travel from the brain to the muscle and command stop. The point of no return had been passed. Jackson could no longer stop his hand, even if he wanted to. The entire mass of his body, all his hatred, and his entire career were invested in this single, final vector. For any observer in the pavilion, the outcome was foregone. In a moment, Bruce's head should have snapped back, and silence should have been replaced by chaos. But precisely in this microsecond, something happened that gave biomechanics experts no peace for decades. The mechanical shutter of the Aeroflex camera closed. A black pedal covered the lens to pull the film to the next frame. The world plunged into darkness for exactly 1/48th of a second. This was that very blind zone we spoke of. A technical pause when reality ceases to be recorded. And precisely in this darkness, Bruce Lee ceased to be an actor and became a physical anomaly. You expect that he jumped back? That is logical. That is the survival instinct. When a train is coming at you, you get off the tracks. But Bruce Lee didn't believe in retreat. He believed in interception. Instead of breaking the distance, he did the unthinkable. He stepped forward. He stepped right into the kill zone, toward the flying fist. It seems like suicide, doesn't it? Ask yourself, if you saw a stone flying at you, would you have the madness to run toward it? But in this madness was cold, calculated mathematics. By shortening the distance, Bruce deprived Jackson's blow of the final phase of acceleration. He choked the kinetic energy in the bud, not letting it reach its peak. But that was only half the equation. The second half lay in what he met this blow with. Bruce didn't raise his hands in a solid block. He didn't try to catch the fist with his palm. He performed a movement known in Filipino boxing as gunting, scissors. But instead of a blade, he used his own anatomy. He raised his right elbow, pointing the olecranon, the elbow process, forward. This is the hardest, densest bone in the upper human body. Essentially, he turned his arm into a bone spike, aimed exactly at the center of the flying fist. Imagine the physics of this moment. On one side, Jackson's fist. It is a complex structure of 27 small bones, ligaments, and soft tissues. It is a hammer, but a fragile hammer. On the other side, Bruce's elbow, a monolithic bone positioned at a perfect 45-degree angle, creating a rigid pyramidal structure supported by the entire body. When these two objects met, it wasn't a collision of equals. It was a collision of an egg and a rock. The sound that rang out in the pavilion didn't resemble the dull thud of a boxing glove. It was a sharp, dry crack, like the sound of a dry branch breaking, amplified by the acoustics of the high ceiling. But the scariest part was that no one saw the moment of impact. For the director, for the extras, even for the cameraman looking into the viewfinder, it looked like a glitch in the Matrix. 1 second, Jackson was winding up. The next, he was already falling. There was no intermediate link. The brains of the observers refused to connect these 2 points. They saw the cause, and they saw the effect. But the event itself was cut out of reality by the scissors of speed. Jackson, who a moment ago felt like a predator, suddenly felt the shockwave return back into his own arm. The energy he had so diligently generated found no exit. It met an insurmountable barrier and, reflecting, went back, tearing his own tissues. The metacarpal bones couldn't withstand the compression. The wrist joint, not designed for such an overload, popped out of its socket. Pain didn't come immediately. First came shock. Shock from the fact that his fist, his main weapon, had suddenly turned into a bag of broken glass. He didn't yet understand that his career was over. He just stared at Bruce, who stood before him, absolutely calm, in the same pose as a second ago, as if he hadn't moved at all. And this dissonance between the monstrous pain and the absolute calmness of the opponent was more frightening than the injury itself. Jackson collapsed to his knees. It wasn't the fall of an actor playing defeat for a paycheck. It was the fall of a building whose foundation had been blown up. His knees hit the concrete floor of the pavilion with a dull, heavy sound, but he didn't even notice. His entire universe, all his feelings and thoughts compressed into one pulsating point, his right hand. A second ago it was a fist, an instrument of dominance. Now it was a shapeless mass of flesh, inside which bones had turned into a mosaic. He pressed the mangled limb to his chest, cradling it like a mother cradles a dead child, and a sound escaped his throat that made the blood run cold even in seasoned lighting technicians. It wasn't a scream. It was an animal howl in which pain, fear, and complete misunderstanding of what had just happened were mixed. "Cut! That's a wrap!" screamed the director, jumping up from his chair. He was furious. In his understanding, the stuntman had just ruined a perfect take by starting to improvise with cheap drama. "Jackson, what the hell? We agreed on light contact. Get up!" The director was sure he was seeing bad acting. He thought he knew the script. But when he walked closer, his anger evaporated, giving way to nauseating horror. He saw the hand. What used to be a wrist joint now resembled a broken branch sticking out at an unnatural angle. The skin was stretched tight, ready to burst from the internal pressure of the hematoma. This wasn't makeup. This was an anatomical catastrophe. The pavilion plunged into chaos. Medics ran to the set, pushing aside extras frozen in shock. Someone shouted for ice. Someone called for an ambulance. But amidst this bustle, there was one island of absolute frightening silence. The operator of the Aeroflex camera slowly removed his finger from the release button. The motor went quiet. The clatter stopped. The operator wasn't looking at Jackson writhing on the floor. He was looking at Bruce Lee, and in his gaze, a question could be read that could destroy the laws of physics. The operator was a professional. His eye was trained to notice details inaccessible to ordinary people. He was looking into the viewfinder at the moment of impact, and he was ready to swear on the lives of his children that Bruce didn't move. Do you understand the paradox? The effect was evident. A broken arm, a fallen giant. But there was no cause. In the operator's reality, Jackson simply took a run-up and broke his own arm on thin air. His brain refused to accept the information. "I didn't see it," he whispered, and his voice trembled. "I was looking right at him. He didn't raise his hand. There is no frame. There is no contact. There's just a gap." Bruce Lee stood over the defeated opponent. He didn't look out of breath. There wasn't a drop of sweat on his forehead. He rolled down the sleeve of his jacket, hiding that very elbow which a second ago served as an anvil for Jackson's hammer. Bruce didn't look at the medics applying a splint. He looked at the director, who was shifting his stunned gaze from the stuntman's mangled hand to the absolutely calm actor. The director tried to put 2 and 2 together, but was getting 5. "Did you hit him?" he asked finally. It was a stupid question, but the only one that came to his mind. "No," answered Bruce, and that was the truth. Technically, legally, and factually, he did not deliver a blow. I just placed a point in space. He decided to hit it himself with all his speed. Bruce spoke calmly, but steel shone through his tone. He knew what Jackson wanted to do. He knew that this fracture was not an accident, but a karmic boomerang. But the most terrible secret of this moment lay not in the injury. The secret lay in the film. When the negatives would be developed 2 days later, the studio bosses would gather in the screening room, expecting to see an epic scene. But they would see a ghost. In one frame, Jackson is winding up. In the next, he is already falling. Between them, a black hole. Bruce Lee moved in the interval between the closing and opening of the shutter. He stole from reality the time needed for retribution, and while Jackson was being loaded onto a stretcher, while his career leaked through his fingers along with the pain, everyone present began to realize one frightening truth. They thought they were filming a movie with an actor. But in reality, they were locked in a cage with a creature whose reflexes outpaced the mechanics of their own perception. And no one, absolutely no one, was safe if the camera wasn't fast enough to record it. Filming stopped completely. The red lights of the ambulance reflecting in the camera lens were the only reminder that violence had just occurred here. Jackson was taken away. His career as a stuntman ended the very second his ego collided with Bruce Lee's biomechanics. Doctors in the emergency room would later call it a compression fracture with displacement, but that is just a dry medical term. In the language of the street, it meant Jackson's hand would never be able to make a fist again. He wanted to leave a scar on the face of a legend, but instead left his own capability on the concrete floor of the pavilion. The pavilion went quiet. It wasn't the respectful silence that accompanies great achievements. It was the silence of fear. Extras, lighting technicians, makeup artists, all of them looked at Bruce as if he were an alien who had just taken off a human mask. They saw the result, but their brains refused to understand the process. How can you break a man's arm without making a visible swing? How can you cause such destruction while remaining in a relaxed pose? Bruce approached the cameraman, who was still standing near his Arriflex, clutching the tripod with whitened fingers. The cameraman was scared. He thought he had missed the shot, that his professionalism had failed. Bruce put his hand on the camera body, hot from work. The metal was warm, vibrating, alive. "Next time," Bruce said quietly, and his voice cut through the silence like a scalpel. "Shoot at 100 frames per second. 24 frames is too slow for the truth. Otherwise, people will think it's magic." He wasn't angry. He wasn't lecturing. He was simply stating a technical fact. In these words lay a frightening truth. Bruce Lee perfectly understood the limitations of the technology of his time. He knew that the mechanical eye of the camera has a limit of perception, and he knew that his own reflexes were beyond that limit. Envy forced the stuntman to try to steal the scene, but Bruce's mastery stole reality itself, hiding retribution in the blind spot between frames of film. He turned a flaw of technology into his alibi, but let's dig deeper. Let's leave physics aside and talk about morality, because this is where the real conflict of this story lies. Bruce Lee knew Jackson was going to hit for real. He read that intent long before the take began. He had a choice. He could have stopped filming. He could have dodged and made the stuntman look like a fool. He could have complained to the director. Any of these options would have preserved Jackson's health. But Bruce chose destruction. He chose the harshest, most uncompromising option of all possible ones. He consciously placed his elbow under the blow, knowing that inertia would do all the dirty work for him. He allowed Jackson to destroy himself. This wasn't defense. This was an execution disguised as an accident. And here's the question I want to leave with you today. A question that forces a reconsideration of the philosopher-pacifist image. Did Bruce have the right to cripple a man for an attempted blow that hadn't even reached its target yet? We love to say that martial arts is the path of peace. But is peace achieved by crushing bones? Or do we live in a reality where the only defense against a predator is to become an even scarier predator? Think about it. Jackson was a scoundrel, yes. He wanted to humiliate Bruce. But did he deserve disability for his stupidity? Bruce Lee taught him a lesson he wouldn't forget for the rest of his life. But was this lesson fair? Or was it a manifestation of that very dark, ruthless ego that Bruce accused others of having? Write in the comments. Was this broken elbow an act of necessary defense, or a demonstration of excessive cruelty by a genius who knew the camera wouldn't catch him? Your answer to this question will show whose side you are really on, the side of mercy or the side of efficiency.